One of my very best friends in the world is Frank Alduino. I met Frank about 20 years ago or more
Fine.
uh, when I was working with AHA, and he volunteered to run a conference um, at the naval near
Yeah.
Annapolis. And it was a great conference, as it turned out. And Frank did a wonderful job. And uh, the title of the conference was "What We've Always Been Here," huh?
Yeah.
And that really is a theme in Italian American studies that I do not identify with. I identify with the Paisani who came in massive numbers after 1880. For me, Italian American history does not begin before 1880. But for Frank has a longer view of things, and he has delved into research that focuses on individuals Italian individuals who participated in the Civil War, and on God, I can't remember his name. The founder of the Metropolitan Museum. Tell me,
Luigi
Frank.
Parmentier-Cesnola.
Say that again for the
Luigi Parmentier-Cesnola.
Luigi di Palma.
The-
Luigi Palma di Cesnola.
Yeah, Parma di Cesnola.
Okay. A very famous guy who won glory in the Civil War, and then became the founder of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. So, Luigi Cesnola di Palma, or di Palma Cesnola, he said.
It's actually
wrote the
both
book.
ways. I mean, both ways in the wreckage, yeah, but generally from Cesnola, yes.
Okay, Frank has taught for many years at Arundel Community College outside of Baltimore, and he's been very active in the Democratic Party there as well, and has taught history and political science, and has been involved in union activities, teachers' union activities as well. And Frank has traveled around Italy and Europe quite a bit, and we'll ask him to tell us a little bit about his career and his major focus on Italians in the Civil War. Were there Italians in the Civil War, and whose side were they on?
They were on both sides, as we'll find out. Well, listen, Dominic, thank you very much. I want to welcome everyone to the Eastern Shore of Maryland. If you need some orientation, we are actually east of Chesapeake Bay, a couple of miles from the Bay Bridge that connects the Western Shore to the Eastern Shore. I am not coming, Dominic, don't be confused. I am not in Cinque Terre as my photo might indicate. I am here in Maryland, but my town is a little tiny town. 3 or 4 large Chicago City high schools probably have more people in them collectively than I have in my entire county. But I will say that we did have a number of things, famous things happen here. The Marquis Lafayette, on his way to Philadelphia, stopped by our county courthouse and gave a speech. That was important. And then more recently, President Obama from Chicagoland, throughout the Russians who live about a quarter of a mile from my house. They have a compound, a diplomatic compound. And so the world's press was at my doorstep as President Obama was kicking out the Russians. Other than that, nothing really has happened here in 300 years or so. But I want to today, I want to preface my remarks by saying that I am grateful for Dominic's invitation. Is very gracious. I'm also grateful for Dominic being a friend for so long, because I know Dominic as a person and someone who has dedicated his enormous energies and talents to helping keep our culture vibrant and alive. You are all probably well aware of the fact that I think he is the single most important reason why we have not an Italian endowed chair, but an Italian American Studies endowed chair. He raised over $1 million, and that number is growing. Again, he is a very important voice in our keeping Italian American history
Frank, I have
out
to
there.
stop you because it's part of the rules. Anyhow, I raised $500,000. It was matched by the
All right, whatever.
president.
Technicality, Dominic.
Forget about it. Let's talk about you.
Oh, all right. I just wanted to spend 30 seconds. But when I started my research on on Italian Americans, I was somewhat dismayed that most of the scholarship, most of the historiography involved that time period after mass migration. And what we mean by that is this period from 1880 to 1924, approximately 1880, but definitely 1880, because that is when Congress passed the major quota acts limiting the number of people from Southern and Eastern Europe. Now, we played a major role. We, being Italian Americans, played a major role in this mass migration of the single largest free migration in the history of the world. We were by far the largest group. And when I became interested in Italian American studies, I was a graduate student. We had a chair who later on became dean. His name was still Candeloro, who Dominic knows well. He passed away several years ago, but he too was one of these icons of the Italian American academic movement. And he called me in his office and said, here are a couple topics I think you should look at. And they were all, again, after millions of us came to this country. And I looked back and I saw that there was absolutely or very little from 1880 backward. Now, that had to do with the fact that there were not very many of us around. We simply were not here in large numbers, but we were still here. And I also felt that by excluding the history of Italian Americans, there was a sense that we were interlopers, that we were not part of the American mosaic. And so I took a critical look at a number of topics, and I came across the American Civil War. The book that I wrote, which I think Dominic sent an image of, is co-written by a fellow undergraduate and graduate student from Florida State University, a very good friend of mine, who is a professor at Longwood University, and he's a military scholar. So we put our ideas together and we began collaborating on this project. Just as a quick overview, we've been here forever. If you take a look at somebody from Chicagoland, Giovanni Schiavo, who, he's a journalist and, not a trained historian, but he put out just a tremendous amount of material on this time frame of colonialization to the period of the 1880s. There were some other scholars who worked in this field. Eugene Scalia, and that name should sound remotely familiar because his son became the Supreme Court Justice who,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
6 or 7 years ago. Eugene Scalia was a professor at Brooklyn College in New York and wrote voluminous amounts of material on the Italian-American experience pre-migration. What is strange is that he never wrote a monograph, never wrote a history of any topic, but very prolific when it came to articles and journals and things of that nature. So there is some work. Now, when I looked at the American Civil War, I was aware that there's a tremendous amount of information on tactics, on personalities, whether they be Confederate or Union. There's a lot of material, believe it or not, on transportation. But one of the topics that is missing, strangely, is immigration as a whole, not just Italian immigration and Italian immigrants participating in the war, but immigrants as a whole. And this is really strange because a huge part of the Union Army, and to a lesser degree, the Confederate Army, was made up of new immigrants to this country. Whether they be Irish, coming out of places like Philadelphia and of course New York, or whether they be German. You had a massive German population in Milwaukee, one of the most German cities outside of Germany. Of course, Chicago had a huge number of Germans, and St. Louis, among others, and even in Cincinnati.
Do you have approximate numbers, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, there are two studies. One is a bit antiquated, Lonn, Lonn, and Burton Wheeler. I think that's his name. I think the numbers are, as an aggregate, of anywhere between 20 and 30%. And it could be more because when you enlisted, those numbers are not terribly accurate. People might or might not have been literate in English, so they left things blank. So it's really hard to ascertain, but a huge number of them. Every single regiment coming out of New York City, every single one had at least one German. And there were several entire regiments from the major or lieutenant colonel down to the private who were Germans. You had the Iron Brigade close to where you guys are up there in Wisconsin, a huge German presence, and so many others.
So the immigrants helped free the slaves?
I'm sorry?
The immigrants helped free the slaves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
but then there were immigrants on the other side fighting to keep slavery alive. Yeah,
well, I mean, there are various reasons why people joined either the Confederate or the Union Army. And let me get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
But you know, when you look and you take a look at David, my co-author, and I, David Coles did, when we looked at enlistment records, you know, one of the problems for Italian Americans is that Italy doesn't exist yet. There is no such thing as Italy. It's still in the process of unification. So that is a problem. You could be you could be the most Italian person in the world and yet be part of the Roman states, or you could be still part of an area controlled by Austria. So, the numbers are hard, but they are still there. They still fought beside the Irish and the Germans and the others, other immigrants, and that's a story that I think we have to tell. We have to tell. We as those of us who study immigration, this is something that is rich. It is something that is fertile and something that needs to be mined. The information on the role that immigrants played during our Civil War. But let's go back to the Italians. As you know, we've always been here. We've always been here. Whether it be Columbus, whether it be Verrazano, even Detente, Henri Detente, during the colonial period, that's the guy who explored with De La Salle, Rene De La Salle, and floated down the Mississippi River. We have people coming here from Italy, escaping poverty or perhaps political punitive measures by the church or by the Austrians, or later on by the Spanish who control southern Italy. People like Lorenzo da Ponte, who wrote the librettos for Mozart. He came, he settled in New York. He had a pretty tough time of it, like many immigrants. He opened a bookshop, and actually later on, his fortunes increased, and he became at least a part of the social scene in New York. However, a lot of Italians came as refugees of the Risorgimento. It was not a good thing to stick around Italy if you defied the Austrians, because you would oftentimes wind up in a dungeon somewhere or dead. So there is this migration of political activists, part of the intelligentsia in Italy, and they are there. They have established viable communities in places like Philadelphia. Philadelphia has always been a home of political dissidents. Prior to the French Revolution, there was a massive French community. Talleyrand, the notorious foreign minister, lived in Philadelphia prior to going back. And so there was an Italian American community there, and of course in New York, there was a visible Italian American community.
And what about New Orleans?
And New Orleans, although to a lesser degree, New Orleans will come a little later, just prior to the war. There are some there. Don't get me wrong. There's some, and they actually were able to create a regiment from New Orleans, but not as important. And maybe because it's my New York bias, not as important as those in the Northeast cities. When the war breaks out, you have a group of young men like Luigi Parma de Cesnola. He is just a remarkable figure, in many ways heroic, in many ways he's also flawed as a human being, but he is entertaining. He is really entertaining. He comes from minor nobility in Torino. he goes to a military school, probably the most prestigious in the kingdom, the Sardinian kingdom at the time. And at a very young age, he is promoted to an officer. And we're talking about in his teens. And as he is on this meteoric rise in the military, something happens. And there are all sorts of rumors. There was one that, he was having an affair with the wife of his commanding officer. There was another rumor that he cheated in a duel, but probably what happened was he got into debt, and the Italians were pretty unforgiving when it comes to debts, and they chained you to a wall in a dungeon somewhere. So he left, and he came to America. And here, he is friendless. He has no contacts. He comes alone. He doesn't speak the language all that well. One of his biographers mentions that he perhaps tried to commit suicide by ingesting some type of drugs, but he gets out of that, and he actually becomes quite wealthy the old-fashioned way, Dominic, and that is he married a very wealthy woman.
Oh,
That's what I'm encouraging all young people to do: marry someone rich. But once he does that, he joins New York society, and a path towards social mobility for a young man in the antebellum period was, of course, the military. And he took advantage of that because his father-in-law was a hero of the War of 1812. He had military connections. He opens up this military training school, this independent school that specialized in cavalry. And he is in that position when war is declared, and he, in fact, signs up as a private, but is quickly elevated to a lieutenant colonel, and that's a hell of a promotion, where he is in charge of his regiment. As I said before, it is a cavalry regiment, the 4th New York. And he is known for his hot temper, his intelligence, and his bravado. And sometimes his bravado crossed the line into insanity. And let me give an example of this. One of the things that the infantry hated was when a regiment of cavalry would go through their bivouac or their camps, and it would stir up dust, and people would get hit by horses, all this other crap. So there was a standing order: don't do this. But Cesnola did it anyway, and he's arrested right before a battle. So he's actually under guard, ready to be brought to the provost marshal for court martial, to be court martialed, and then the Battle of Aldie is taking place. You could see it. He could see the artillery smoke. He breaks away, gets on a horse, and he sees that his troops are being pushed back, and he leads them. He literally led them without a gun, without any weapons, not even a saber. And for this, either depending on what you think about this insanity or this heroic action, he wins the Medal of Honor, and becomes a general later on.
that's the Congressional Medal of Honor?
That is the Congressional Medal of Honor. Yeah, he's
Oh.
one of several Italian Americans. In fact, you guys had not too long ago, didn't you have a at the museum there,
Yeah,
Italia, exhibit of Medal of Honor winners?
yeah, I think they're still there.
Okay, yeah, and he was one of them. And overall, he survived being a prisoner of war at Libby, which was this notorious prison. And after deprivation and unspoken horrors, he goes back into the military to lead at the end of the war. Could have easily gone back to his estate in upstate New York, but he did that. Now, later on, just as a postscript, he will become, because of his political connections, the American ambassador to Cyprus, which was a consulate position because it is controlled by the Ottoman Turks. And he spent his time not doing official duties, I guess, as a consulate or consul. He got interested in archaeology, and he began to basically steal antiquities. He used his diplomatic immunity and, more importantly, what's called the diplomatic pouch, which could be of any size, including a box, to take these valuable artifacts out of Cyprus. And he sold a number and sold most of them to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which is the basis of their early collection. And again, he is, he's always getting into public spats with people, generally in the press. He didn't like the idea that working men and women could come into the museum without dressing up, which is really contrary to the whole Metropolitan's, mission statement at the time. Just picking fights with people. So he's a really cantankerous, unpleasant human being, but he's one of us. Another guy quickly that I want to talk about is a native-born Italian American, and that is Francis B. Spinola. Spinola was born in Setauket on Long Island, and he became involved in Tammany politics. And he's really important for a lot of reasons. And it's been a person who's been forgotten in Italian American history, I think. He was a Tammany politician when it was almost exclusively Irish. And what they did, because Tammany wasn't really too crazy about this one district that was kind of marginal because they didn't have that many Irish in it, they put Spinola in charge of. And Spinola showed his chops as a politician and becomes more Tammany than Tammany Hall. When the war breaks out, because of his connections and in Albany, he is given the command of a brigade, which basically 4 or 5, as many as 6 regiments, and becomes a brigadier general, thus in charge of a brigade.
How many people?
37, about 250, maybe. It differed, about 400, depending on a brigade, maybe more. And each state, and there was no uniformity, so each state was a little different. His great contribution was recruitment in New York, but without any military experience whatsoever, which was not unusual, believe me, in the Civil War. This is a war of amateurs. He leads this brigade after the Battle of Gettysburg, when Lee's troops are leaving Pennsylvania to head back to Virginia for sanctuary, they're being chased by Spinola, and he's seriously wounded. But again, without any training, without, probably being on a horse, I guess. Here's a guy who made tremendous contributions. And he later on became the first Italian-American member of Congress from Brooklyn. So he's important. One other person, and I'm going to share some photos with you.
Okay, that's good. Go ahead.
Because what happened was I am on a Mac, and I did have a bunch of photos here on a slideshow, but they did not work this morning.
Okay.
And here is Luigi Palmer di Cesnola. And if I was if I was a Hollywood producer and I had to make a movie about a Indiana Jones like figure, I'd include this guy here. And let me show you before we go any further.
Where is it at Zoom class? Oh, here it is.
There he is. Yeah. Really kind of distinguished. And in all the descriptions, whether they be by people from diaries that I read or the newspapers, they always commented on his physicality. The fact that he looked dashing, he looked the part as a cavalry person. There he is. And let me show you Francis Spinola. Spinola after his service in the military, re-entered politics, and he became remarkably wealthy. As a congressman, a Tammany congressman, he saw his economic opportunities and he seized them.
How many terms did he serve?
I think that's a good question. I'm not absolutely sure, Dominic, but I want to say 6 or 8 years. So
Okay.
3 or 4 terms. But while he was in the state Senate for a while, before being elevated to Congress, he was able to secure the heating, and back then it was steam, but he was able to secure a monopoly for steam construction in New York City. So you can imagine how much money that he was able to acquire. His home, he had 2 of them, a really nice one in Brooklyn Heights, and the other was on Long Island, not far from where I grew up. And today it is the president of SUNY at Stony Brook lives there. And I assure you, it is just a magnificent home right on the water. It is massive. And again, that was Spinola. And here's another guy who I want to talk about. And I want to keep this to about a half hour, if that's okay, Dominic.
Yeah.
We started at 3:41. But here's another professional soldier who also had a really fascinating background, and that is Edward Ferraro. Ferraro was born in Spain to Italian parents, and the reason why he's in Spain is that both parents are entertainers. They are dancers, and so from a very early age, Ferraro learned the Terpsichorean arts, the art of dancing. He became an instructor at West Point, and his only job was to teach dancing, because at West Point they believed that a gentleman, in order to become a gentleman, had to know how to dance. And so he actually became part of the faculty as a dance instructor at West Point. It's a good gig. Later on, he will join the New York Volunteers, and he too becomes early on a brigadier, and then he becomes a major general. He's the highest ranking Italian-American general. And his record is mixed. He is in the area around Kentucky, where he shows that he does know military strategy, and but he's also at what we call the Battle of the Crater.
I don't remember that.
When, right outside of Petersburg, Virginia, someone had the bright idea of, because it's trench warfare, first trench warfare in world history. Confederates on one side, we're on the other side. Someone had the bright idea of tunneling under the Confederates and then blowing them to smithereens. But that plan didn't work all that well. There was a premature blast that didn't hit the vast majority of the Confederates, and they sent troops without waiting. And Ferraro has always been blamed for losing his nerve, prematurely sending just an incredible number of men into the crater, where they became fish in a barrel, to use a cliche. And a lot of them happened to be African Americans. And so I think history has looked upon Ferraro unkindly, and I think without warrant, because what we discovered was that he advised, not to move his troops, that there was a guy by the name of Lytle, who was a horrible drunk, who was oftentimes drunk while in command, and it was actually his decision to make, not Ferraro. So collateral damage in the history books for Mr. Ferraro. For those of you who are Sicilian, as I am, there is a Sicilian who contributes to the American Civil War, and his name is Enrico Fardela. Enrico Fardela. And Fardela was up there in Massachusetts. He was a veteran of the First and the Second War of Independence for Italy. He came with a tremendous resume. His only limitation, however, was that he didn't speak English, which, in Massachusetts, the troops were not Italian. They were Yankees, they were Anglo. And so he oftentimes, because of this communication gap, was not effective as he was. But nonetheless, he contributes down in North Carolina, and wins a couple of important battles down there on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Finally, I just want to mention the Garibaldi Guard, and then in passing, I will mention the Confederates. Giuseppe Garibaldi is a rock star, an international rock star. By the time the American Civil War breaks out, he has, early on become a revolutionary. He's part of a coup to overthrow the king of Italy back then. He is not successful. He's in the Navy, and he goes to South America, where he has this remarkable adventure He helps liberate what is today Uruguay, and the breakaway province of Brazil. The international press love this guy. He always wears this red uniform. It's just too bad we didn't have TikTok or Facebook at the time. He probably would have been more popular than the Kardashians. Yet after his South American ventures, he comes back to the United States, and he actually lives. He lives in New York, Staten Island, for about 9 months. He stays at the home of Antonio Meucci, as we all know, the guy who invented the telephone. And don't let anybody tell you different. And he lives this modest life. This is a guy like whoever picks up a newspaper knows who the hell he is. But he lives this modest life as a candle maker. He takes the ferry to Manhattan, where he hangs out with firefighters and drinks wine with them. Just an incredible. But he didn't like Staten Island, and I don't blame him. I don't like Staten Island. They wouldn't let him hunt there, and he said it was too damn cold, and so he went back to Italy to help unify it, as you know. But Garibaldi, when the American War began, and there's a mythology that Abraham Lincoln offered him the command of the Union Army, which is nonsense, because first of all, a president can't do that. The president of the United States is commander-in-chief. He cannot turn the army over to anybody. And the fact that we have an Italian who would possibly get control of the army from the Republican Party. The Republican Party still has a real nativistic streak to it at the time of the Lincoln administration. A lot of know-nothings, these anti-immigrant types, made up a sizable part of the Republican Party. But what Abraham Lincoln did do is he offered him a command of an army, of several armies or a corps. And Garibaldi didn't want to come back to America. He had more important things to do. He needed to liberate Italy. We still have the Roman states that need to be brought into a united Italy. We still had Venice that needed to be brought into Italy. And so the idea of Lincoln offering him command of the entire army is just nonsense. But with that said, we have the Garibaldi Guard created, and the Garibaldi Guard was a polyglot of different nationalities. Its lieutenant colonel is Hungarian, who will be court-martialed and spend an ungodly amount of time in jail. But the other lesser officers were all Italian, and but you have Greeks in this regiment. You have Hungarians. You have Italians. You have a couple of Jewish Americans, as well as others, and they're noted for a lot of reasons, especially their uniforms. They wore these kind of traditional European uniforms. They attracted just tremendous crowds when they were on parade. And although early on, again, they have a mixed record, they did prove themselves. One of the unfortunate things about the Garibaldi Guard is that once enlistment ended, a lot of those early immigrants did not join up. So it became primarily an Anglo. But it is I think a source of great pride to the Italians, not only in New York City, where this regiment comes from, but all Italians in the North. And it was used by the Lincoln administration as, propaganda and to drum up support of other immigrants. Finally, the Confederates, as Dominic alluded to, there was a viable Italian-American population that came into New Orleans starting in the mid-1850s, accelerating by the time of the war. And they were able to put together a international regiment made up of a majority of Italians. These are folks who are fighting, for a variety of reasons like those in the North, but they are Confederates. They're fighting to maintain slavery and keep people in bondage. So, in closing, again, there were Italian Americans. I don't know how many people read Fra Noi. I hope you do. It is a fantastic, I look forward to Paul's issues every month. I have given them to gifts to my parents and my brother, but there was an article, I guess a couple of months ago that I wrote on an Italian American, Admiral Girardi, who is the highest ranking admiral in the American fleet in the 1880s. So we did play our part in the American Civil War. And although small in size, we contributed to a Union victory.
Yeah, that's the theme of our Italian American War Veterans Museum here at the Casa Italia, that Italian Americans have been in every war and active participants, and, especially in World War II.
Yeah, especially in World War II. I mean, and again, it's this whole idea of assimilation. How do you assimilate? Well, the single largest assimilator is the military, and especially in a time of war, where you're put in with a bunch of other people who are not Italians or immigrants, and your life depends on them and theirs on yours. So they really don't care, if you practice Catholicism or your family comes from Sicily or they're Jewish. They, at that point, that's irrelevant. That's really important. So let me ask you, do you guys have? Yes, please. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Any observations?
May I speak to Frank?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm here.
Oh, Frank, yes. Your talk was very interesting.
Thank
you. The more we participate in Casa Italia events, the more we feel proud to be Italians, either as Italian Americans still there in the United States, or those who have experienced the homecoming as myself. I was reminded of many points that were made during my studies here in Italy, because I went to high school here and to grade school over there in America. And when I arrived here, I realized that a major concern of my fellow students and professors was politics, political activities. And this was the 70s, the age of the era of the Red Brigades and so on and so on. Which side were you on, the right or the left? I was in those times pretty neutral. But ever since then, I've had this impression that politics and more so even political idealism is a typical aspect of Italians. Going back to Dante, the times in the Guelfi and Ghibellini, and considering Jacob Burckhardt, who said that the Renaissance was an Italian phenomenon, because in Italy, the state was conceived as a work of art. There are some doubts nowadays. Sorry for what you hear about Italian politics. This COVID thing, we're in a bunch of trouble. So you've mentioned military leaders,
Mhm.
Garibaldi himself, who were also idealists.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think of this feeling or impression that I was expressing, that what has animated the Italians who migrated to America, and especially to America, was perhaps the need for a land of liberty, the one that Tocqueville said in Democratia in America was the real democracy. I just wanted to ask your opinion on this, Frank.
Okay, well, we were breaking up a little bit, so let me try to, because I think there are 3 or 4 different questions in there. So let me see if I could tackle them. From my own observations, being in Italy, I'm amazed the level of knowledge that Italians have when it comes to politics. Not only their own politics, but our politics in the United States. I'm just absolutely stunned at that. I walk into a classroom at a university, and half of them didn't know we had an election last week. So to go across the ocean to culture that, although Western, is so much different than we experience in this country, and have them command of the facts and know what's going on. It's refreshing. It's refreshing. In terms of, you mentioned Garibaldi, as a political figure, he was kind of co-opted in the 1970s, and maybe even before, by the left, because I don't know if Garibaldi was a socialist. I think he was an egalitarian, and I think that had he entered politics, on a more active way, because he was in Parliament, but had he been more forceful, I think that he would have clearly did things like land, because after he came up through the South, after he liberated Sicily and Naples, he got a firsthand view of life among the peasantry, and that stuck with him. And so, again, I think that he was and remains a symbol of socialism, which is not necessarily a bad thing in Italy. Now, again, you were breaking up, so I got just part of it. Is there any other question that you asked that?
Oh, yes. Sorry if we were breaking up. The idea, that the migration to America could have been beyond being just a dream itself. The search for the land of liberty, the one that Tocqueville in Democratia in America, was really the land of liberty and freedom. So migrants searching more for this kind of political freedom that they did not have in Italy. And this quest that is supposedly in the Italian blood. What is your opinion of that?
Well, Dominic, I don't know if you agree or disagree with me, but I think a lot of, especially immigrants in that wave, had other things to worry about than politics, things like survival. You really don't see activism among Italian Americans until a little later on, when they become ingrained in the system, when they go through public schools and things of that nature. And the concept of freedom I think is truly something that is tangible. I do. I mean, my grandparents were Sicilian peasants, and they were able to open a grocery store after living, in what can only be described as a slum, and raising my father, who will soon be 89 years old. So yeah, if that's the question you're asking, if that thing is still alive, and I would agree it still is, and it was for them. Do you agree, Dominic? Early on, I think that was kind of.
Yeah, well, the politics in Italy got around the late 90s and early 1900s, got such that a number of activists were deported or escaped to America. But I think the earliest of the mass migration people were doing it because they had no other economic choice.
Yeah. So, I mean, and do you agree with me or disagree with me that their political participation was minimal in their early experience?
Yeah, the earliest ones came temporarily. They just were birds of passage.
Right. About 25% of them.
Or any long-term things. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great question. I appreciate that question.
More
Thank
questions?
you, Frank, thank you so much,
Go around.
Dominic.
Yeah, I see Peter. Peter has a question.
Lou Carcino, you always have.
Yeah, Pete.
Oh, Peter wants.
Yeah.
Peter.
I can't hear him. Is he on the chat?
Lou, we got you on the microphone. Go ahead.
One of the questions I had, and thanks for the presentation. Really, it's cool. We began the conversation by looking at Dominic said that early on, most history of Italians, 1880 on, as you did. What was the was there a good deal of discrimination against the Italians early on, or were their numbers so low that it was only when you had the mass migration that people started to worry about Italians and overcoming the nativistic sort of culture and the like? So I was interested in finding out whether there was this widespread discrimination early on with any Italians, or it was a product of the mass migration that came.
Yeah, no, if you take a look at early Italian immigration, these folks are from the north. They're not from the Mezzogiorno. They're from the northern areas, and they tended to be educated, and they tended to be, again, politically active. That's why they're forced to leave, and it was, I guess if you're an American and you have an Italian in your midst, that's pretty exotic, especially one that reads Dante, and one who listens to opera. That's pretty exotic.
The founding fathers were pretty respectful of Italian and the Roman heritage and all that, and so and there were the sculptors who helped to build Washington D.C. in the early years, and there was the reverence for Roman history and the Republic and all that sort of thing. So there were the know-nothings, but they were in the late 40s, 1850s, and maybe they were aimed more at other immigrant groups than the Italians, obviously, because there were no Italian.
Yeah, they were very, again, the numbers are small. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
No.
Peter, are you back online?
Yeah, still here. Yes.
Okay, good.
Up there, and thank you for the informative talk there. And you're very detailed. I wondered if you did your dissertation on work leading to this subject on the Civil War.
Actually, no, I actually
Oh,
did,
no?
I did my dissertation on prohibition in Florida. So I hung out with gangsters in Ybor City and talked to some unsavory moonshiners who, because I graduated in 1989. So I started my dissertation in 87, and a number of these people were still alive.
All right.
Okay, so we'll go on to other questioners. The Harringtons have a question, or Jeanette, or who's out there?
We don't,
Dr. J?
the hearings really don't have a question, but we would like to thank the professor for a wonderful talk and a very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was very kind. Thank you very much. I love doing these things, and I love sharing my past with people, especially Italian Americans.
There, I'm unmuted.
Okay,
Now you're good.
question?
No, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a topic I pretty much knew nothing about, so I appreciated all this.
Okay, Flora looked like
Very
she had
much.
a question.
Yeah.
Unmute, Flora.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
got you.
Okay, yeah, I don't have a question, but I do have one little comment. Well, two actually. First of all, thanks for a very interesting presentation. My comment is regarding what you said about Italians being interested in politics a
Yeah.
lot more than the people in this country.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty common in Western Europe. My husband is from Italy, and his family, it's a rural family from a very small community. His father could have taught a lot of us in the United States about US history. And he was a farmer by livelihood, by profession. I think one thing, and we've often talked about this at home, is that people here become interested when they travel to other countries. But when you look at our newspapers and our newscasts, how much time or space do they actually give to things going on elsewhere? Really, very little.
Yeah. We're a
Yeah.
bit ethnocentric in this country.
Yeah, and our schools too. I mean, what do they teach about other countries? Not very much.
Well, I I read the New York Times, and the New York Times spends actually a good part of their daily newspapers to international affairs. But you know, my Washington Post, which I get delivered to me, just does not carry that much international news. So
The
and that-
Chicago Tribune doesn't either. There's a section called Nation and World, which is partly about the US and partly about the world, but it's never more than about 2 pages long at the most.
yeah.
yeah, okay. Another question? Anybody, a comment? Okay, Peter, go ahead, unmute. Peter,
Frank,
There we go, Peter.
there it is. Yes, Frank, you mentioned some Italians involved in the Confederate side. Was that because of land holdings in the South, or for what reason would Italians gravitate to the Confederate cause?
Well, I mean, some of them actually. There was a guy whose name was literally 10th and last. That was his translated name, because his mother had 10 children, and he actually was a plantation owner, so he had a vested interest in seeing the Confederacy win. But from the limited numbers of enlisted men we found, they're looking for a job. They're looking for a steady paycheck. I don't know, you know, had they been in Cook County, they would have maybe signed up for the union because it provided them with money, which they obviously desperately needed.
Mhm. Thank you.
Gloria Nardini, you always got a question to ask. Turn off your unmute, please.
Oh, there she is.
Okay,
Gloria, unmute.
I'm unmuted, right?
Yeah,
we
we hear
got you.
Okay. You know, I wonder,
Yes.
I came in at the tail end of this, but I'm wondering, what can we talk about that's going on in Italy right now? What do we know?
COVID's pretty bad.
Yeah, COVID's bad.
Yeah, I mean, there was I think going back to Garibaldi, there was a movement, they called themselves the Sardines, right? Because they used to pack in. And I think a lot of this movement was grassroots, and more importantly, it was young people. It was young people. And then COVID hit, and like everything else, it just disintegrated. I think it's going to take months and months and months and months, especially, even after we get a vaccination, for this resistance to reappear in Italy. But it's a study in how a pandemic can kill a movement. Just like the American Civil War, it killed all sorts of social movements. Well, the pandemic is killing all sorts of movements as well, both good and bad.
Yeah, we're afraid it might hurt Italian-American identity development. We can't have meetings here at Casa Italia. And all we can have is Zooms like this.
Yeah.
And also, Sophia Lahren made a new movie.
Oh, yes. Has anybody seen it?
Really? My God, how old is she?
86.
Oh my God.
86, and the movie is directed by the son.
Huh.
Yeah, the last one he directed with her was, what's the name of it? Mario Puzo's good book.
Fortunate Pilgrim?
Fortunate Pilgrim, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in this movie, Sophia takes on an 11-year-old, I think, boy who's a Muslim, perhaps. It got good reviews.
Yeah.
Wow. So where is that?
I think
where is that being played?
It's being played town.
Pretty soon.
Oh, it's actually in theaters?
On Netflix.
Yes.
I think so, a little bit. It's going to be on Netflix in the middle of the month.
Yeah, but it's on. My sister and I think, are going to go see it tomorrow. It's at the Landmark.
Okay.
Okay, well.
All theaters are closed, so we can't see it in the theater.
Right. Oh, yeah, not many.
Okay, I've got to close this thing. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. If anybody wants to communicate with me individually, stay around and we'll settle some issues that we might have or questions you might have about the project here at the Casa Italia. I'd like to thank Frank again. Frank Alduino lent us his expertise, and now we've got a more sophisticated view of Italians in American history and culture. Thanks a lot, Frank.
Well, thank you, Dominic. And just in closing, just let me say, keep up the great work, all of you. And you have a treasure there, not only with Dominic, but with Casa Italia, because without these organizations, our culture doesn't survive. So, kudos to each and every one of you for your hard work. And ciao, ciao.
Grazie.
Grazie.
Frank.
Grazie, arrivederci.
Arrivederci.